Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the conference on Has the Game Changed? Our panelists for the discussion on Asia and the world, managing the rise of Asia are Professor Kishore Mahbubani, Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Christopher Hill, Dean of Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver, Merritt Ageno, Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, and Cheol-Hee Park, Dean of the Graduate School of International Studies, Seoul National University. Panelists, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I can tell you that my role as moderator is mission impossible because the first two panels, unfortunately, were brilliant. So the third panel has got some very high standards to live up to. But worse still, you all had lunch. I can see that many of you are going to sink back and close your eyes. So our mission is to make sure that we make this a very exciting session. So I'll stick to tradition and make 3 points. The first point I'm going to make is that Trump or no Trump, the long-term trends will continue. I mean, one thing is clear. The return of Asia is unstoppable. As I mentioned in PPP terms already, of the 4 largest economies in the world, number 1 is China, number 2 is United States, number 3, India, number 4, Japan. And just imagine what it was like 30, 40 years ago, where we are today. Now you see the long-term trend. So that, I think, is going to carry on. That's the good news. My second point is the bad news. The bad news is that even though the Asian states have been very, very successful in economic terms, for very complex reasons, they haven't realized that as you become bigger and stronger and more developed, you actually got to take on more responsibilities. And one of the harshest points I'll make about my fellow Asian states is that they've been free riders on a global system that was actually essentially a gift by the West to the world. They've taken it for granted. For example, all of us are beneficiaries of WTO. And we've benefited a lot from this global order, but we haven't done enough to take care of it. So just like Enrico Letta, who walked in at the perfect moment, you knew I was going to mention him, said that, maybe it's time for Europe to become adult. So I think it's time for Asia to become adult too. So I hope we will discuss in this panel, what is it Asia needs to do? What additional responsibilities it needs to take on to manage this very different world that is emerging? And I can tell you, you can't ask for a better panel than this. Hidayat mentioned their current designations, but I want you to know that Christopher Hill has a remarkable diplomatic career. He's produced a book called Outpost, a Diplomat at Work. He served as ambassador to Iraq, Assistant Secretary of State of East Asian Pacific Affairs, ambassador to the Republic of Korea, ambassador to Poland, ambassador to the Republic of Macedonia, and of course he's a legendary negotiator with North Korea. So that takes a very special skill. Next, we have Merritt Ageno, who's also had a very distinguished career. She was the Deputy Assistant US TR for Japan and China, and then became the Executive Director of the first International Antitrust Advisory Committee, US Department of Justice, served on the WTO's appellate body, and has been at Columbia for 18 years and appointed Dean in 2013. And last but not least is Cheol-Hee Park, and he's been had various appointments, including Director of the Institute for Japanese Studies at Seoul National University. He's been an advisor to various ministries, board members. He's a co-author of 2 books. One is How Japan's Dietment is Made, and another book on LDP politics. He also received the first Nakasone Yasuhira Award in 2005 in recognition of his academic activities and practical contribution to the friendly ties within Korea and Japan. Do you want to ask a difficult job? I would say that's a difficult job. So we have a great panel. I told, we were discussing, Chris, Merritt, and Cheol-Hee and I, I thought maybe useful for each one of them to make a very brief 3-minute statement each to describe what they see as the current challenges, especially with Trump and all.
Yeah.
And then we'll throw the floor open and try to keep this as stimulating as possible and make sure that no one of you falls asleep. No. So, okay. Chris.
So do we have to keep that format of only doing 3 points all the time?
No.
You know, like,
I can. Some of the panelists are going to break that 3-point rule.
You know, like our new Secretary of Energy, I have trouble with number 3 usually. First of all, I just want to second your point about the continuing rise of Asia. I think it's one of the most exciting developments in all our lifetimes, and I think it will continue in our children and our grandchildren's lifetime as well. I think it is truly an extraordinary development in the world. And for the United States, it presents special opportunities and also some challenges. Foreign policy in the U.S. is usually driven toward crisis rather than toward importance. And whenever there's an important issue and a crisis issue, the urgent issue always gets precedence. And so as long as we have something called the Middle East out there, it's always difficult to get the focus on the important. And in this case, I think Asia is extremely important. We also have a president coming into office who, you know, you listen to a lot of American commentators, and there are people who try to be normalizers about it and say, well, you know, it's just another example of American transition. It'll be okay. He'll appoint some people. He'll climb down from some tough positions, but overall, it's going to be okay. I don't know if it's going to be okay. I think there's a lot to be concerned about. And the first thing to be concerned about is how unpredictable he is. And this is because he skates on a very thin fact base. So we don't really know what he's operating on. I mean, did he, for example, know that he was going after a core interest of China? Does he even know what a core interest of China is when he talks about taking on the one China policy? Secondly, has the one China policy been so bad? I mean, it's been a consensus of 8 American presidents. We've developed an extraordinary relationship with China. At the same time, we have a pretty extraordinary relationship with Taiwan. So, you know, there's an American expression, if it ain't broke, then why fix it? And I think he started to fix something that, frankly, wasn't broken. So will he be able to pull back from that? Because another aspect of his personality is that when he says something, he doesn't like to be told it's wrong and say, okay, sorry, I guess I was wrong about that. He has a tendency to kind of double down on what he says. So is he now going to pursue the notion that somehow we ought to take the one-party policy and put it back, one China policy and put it back on the table? I hope not, because I don't think that's the way to go. That said, I think there are enormous challenges in dealing with contemporary China that our president really needs to be very much engaged in. And so another key question will be, he has a very talented, and he is talented, this new Secretary of State, this Secretary of State designate, Tillerson. But will Tillerson not just develop the relationship with China, but will he be able to develop the relationship with the president that he's going to absolutely need if he's going to be able to kind of run these tough issues that, you know, China cannot fit on 140 characters, maybe 140 Chinese characters, but not in the English language. So I think we have to see how that relationship is going to emerge, because if our China policy is going to be run by Mike Flynn, the National Security Advisor, well, start digging your bomb shelter. I mean, it's really, it's very worrisome. And why do I talk about China? Because it is so important. I mean, 1.4 billion people are important. But it really is the second issue, and the issue that we need to develop patterns of cooperation with China over, and that is North Korea. Because sometime in the next 4 years, and maybe even shorter, North Korea is going to be able to stand up a missile and have a nuclear device in that missile and say, this missile and this device is able to hit the U.S. mainland. And if you're Donald Trump, you don't want to be the president, you know, standing election in 2020, having allowed this new threat to the United States. Now, many people say, you know, one North Korean missile. Well, the thing about nuclear weapons is one missile can be a big problem. And so the question will be, if there's a solution to North Korea, I think it has to involve China. It doesn't have to involve outsourcing it to China, because China can't solve it any more than we can solve it alone. But we need to have some kind of patterns of relationship with China. And so if we're going to deal with this North Korea, we better be able to have the relationship, in effect, the tools to deal with it. And we need to have a sort of constant presence, including with South Korea. So I think we're in for a very interesting ride, and I would suggest we all fasten our seatbelts. And I'll try to keep to the time frame, and we'll pick up on some of these later.
But that was a great start, great start. Merit.
Well, thank you very much, Kishore. First, let me just thank you for including me in this terrific couple of days. I really admire what you have done at this school under your leadership. It's really a fantastic school with a global reputation now. It's a privilege to be here. I think it's, I'd like to start by stressing that we should always keep in mind what are the structural changes that are happening in this region that I think are increasing uncertainty, whether President-elect Trump comes to office or anybody else. And I think we have to keep those in mind. I think Trump adds more uncertainty, but there was substantial uncertainty developing in this part of the world. And so why is that? Well, it's been mentioned quite a bit this morning in passing, but I think you know, the altered role of the United States in the region and in the world needs to be stressed. And the consequence of that, of shifting from this bipolar world to a multipolar world, is a very substantial one. And you will have more familiarity with security issues than I, but it seems that every country in this region is rethinking and doing some adjustments in their security thinking. Interestingly, you know, Prime Minister Abe has put his own flavor on that. My own colleagues at Columbia argue that whether Prime Minister Abe is in office or anyone else in Japan, they would be thinking about how to make some adjustments to Japan's security position. You know, in the past, during the Cold War, Japan was concerned about being pulled into US entanglements in the region. Now, I think the US has been more concerned about being pulled into Japan's concerns. And so there was much criticism of Abe when he went to Yasukuni and adjustments thereafter. Now, when China has taken the actions that it has in the region, this has obviously caused considerable concerns throughout the region. And as was alluded to this morning, it seems to have resulted, I think, in strengthening of US-Japan, as well as, it seems, more alignment of views between the US, Japan, ASEAN, South Korea, Australia. So I think those are questions that we could spend a little time thinking about on the security front. Now, the president-elect does introduce more uncertainty about this. I don't think that, I think he will retreat from earlier statements about nuclear issues. I think those will fade away. And I do think, you know, that US administrations have been complaining about free riding, every one of them. That's not a new point. I think if Japan steps up and undertakes more for its own cost of defense, the more important question is whether the American public, irrespective of Trump, is as prepared to support. And that's a structural change we need to think about, and what will be the role of the president in reminding the American public of our commitments in this region. So these are the structural security questions I hope at some point we speak to. On the economic, you know, we shouldn't leave the session without emphasizing the incredible historic transformation of China and its significance in the region and in the world. Now, if China implements the kinds of reforms that it says it wants to introduce, this will be hugely important and positive for China, for the region, and for the world. It speaks about creating a decisive role for markets. It's made multilateral commitments to that end. So the question of implementation and what that means for Chinese and global economic vitality, I think, is something we could speak to. To me, the One Belt, One Road is also potentially a very intriguing proposition that will capture the imagination and the commercial interests of every country in the region and in Europe. So how this will unfold remains to be seen. I think at this point it's mostly aspirational. Will the U.S. be as engaged as it thought it might in the last administration under TPP? Look, TPP is obviously dead. The tools that the administration has to engage are unilateral, bilateral, or regional. There are now more constraints on unilateral action because of the frameworks that have been created. Why were those frameworks created? They were not created because the U.S. wanted to cede sovereignty over issues. They were created because it was thought that you needed to create cooperation instruments in order to achieve results. So I think one of the questions we will be asking ourselves in this period is, if the Trump administration wants to achieve results from China, from other countries in the regions, how is it going to achieve those results? And what are the constraints, I think, including multilateral constraints on unilateral action that it may otherwise wish to undertake? So let me just say that I do think there is a bigger gap in the region and in the world if the U.S. has dropped TPP and doesn't wish to strengthen international institutions. China has already indicated very positive statements about the WTO and certain features of the international system. I'm not concerned that institutions like AIIB are creating a kind of parallel universe of institutions. You know, AIIB is already a multi-party organization. So if you ask what can be done, to help Asia, I think go down this path. I think creating more support for plurilateral and multilateral institutions where China is a party, I would think is very important. I do think that clearly the bank and the fund, which may not be emphasized so much in this administration, but will nevertheless be ones where China will want to play an increased role, will need to have more voice for China.
Great. I'm glad, actually, since I want to sort of alert our colleagues from China. I see Jia Zhengguo is here and Jimin is somewhere, I hope. Yes. I hope you'll come in and say something about how China views, give us the real inside story of China's secret plan to how to manage Trump. So, Cheol-Hee, over to you.
Thank you, Kishore. Before I come up to the podium, just Kishore asked me, be simple, straight, short, and brilliant. I don't know. I can match the last condition. This is a mission impossible. But I will just say a few points. I completely agree with Kishore that the return of Asia and then overall rise of Asia is there compared to other regions. Also, this area has been relatively peaceful, prosperous, and stable if you compare this region with other parts of the world. So in that sense, we are living in a good region. But I have 4 areas of concerns that can destabilize the region in the future. I'll just take out 4 areas. Okay. The first area of concern is a possible American retreat from liberal international order after Trump has been elected. He said a lot of provocative rhetorics about the global order, but especially when it comes to the Asian issue, that really concerns me in a sense that all the security, prosperity, and peace in this region has been securely guaranteed by the American presence and American commitment in the region. But when he talk about the very protectionism-like agenda, isolationist rhetoric, wow, that concerns us a lot because I don't think American can go to the kind of a protectionist era. But at least in the name of America first, okay, just to twist the free trade principle and then going toward the strategic trade or fair trade principle, as we witnessed in the late 1980s between U.S. and Japan. So that's possible. That can strain the relationship between the U.S. and other the trading partners. Also, the regional security the provision, so including the alliance with Korea, Japan, and other countries. Okay, don't leave it to me. So I will leave the matters to you guys and take care of yourself. That sounds, wow, should we become more autonomous from the U.S. commitment, security commitment? Are we capable of doing that? So are we really prepared for any kind of American retreat from the region? If you ask me about the Korean situation, actually not. So when we face a very dangerous, the immediate neighbor, North Korea, American presence is very important. So I think it's just the potential. I don't know if it's possible in the future, but that gives me a kind of that's the first area of concern. And the second concern is a Chinese action. I don't think China is a revisionist power, as many IL theories people suggest. And as China itself declares under the banner of new type great power relations, I don't think China is ready to and willing to challenge against the dominant United States at the moment. But my sense is that China has some kind of aspiration for regional order modification in a security field, in an economy field, and other fields. So whether China will rely on the strategy of charm offensive or continue to try test muscles in the neighboring area, that concerns me. If China continues to rely on assertive tactic to intimidate the neighbors and then try to increase the influence in the region, well, one possibility is making a countervailing coalition against China, but that's not good for China as well. But whether China can keep control of the paces of the influence increasing is China's choice, but that's another areas of concern for me. And the third area of concern is related to Japan. So Japan itself is not a concern, but as Mary said just before, Japan is readapting to the situation, especially in the security policy. They are very much anxious and concerned about their own security, especially after East China Sea conflict. They are relying on what I call internal balancing, external balancing, and network balancing strategy to stand against the Chinese potential threat. And then that's not a concern. What concerns me is the kind of future course of Japan-China relationship. It's more of a rivalry and competition rather than cooperation. If China and Japan continue to be a kind of very grueling partner that has a very uncooperative stance, many other neighboring countries have, wow, what can you do in the middle? So that concerns me. And the last area, and not the least, but Chris just mentioned, North Korea. Definitely, not just as a South Korean who face a kind of formidable threat from North Korea. North Korea is a kind of really most significant destabilizer, spoiler, problem child in the region, not just for South Korea. So they are violating and a lot of international norms and institutional behavior. Disruptive behavior is normal for them. They think they are normal. So how we can get it? That's the kind of deep problem because they are ignoring any kind of thing. They always break the promises and then continue to develop nuclear weapon and then try to launch missiles against the repeated warnings. So whether North Korea, I always say that North Korea is like a black hole of the whole region, not just the kind of a Korean peninsula issue. If North Korea provokes us in a very different way, in a massive manner, this is not a concern just for South Korea, Japan, and the United States. China would be involved, Russia would be involved, all the other countries should be involved in the issue. So that's the kind of the last issue, but most concerning issue for me. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Chris was whispering to me that you broke the 3-point rule. You had 4 areas of concern.
Additional North Korea is a big concern.
So I don't know whether, Jinko, you want to come in now or later with some comment, because we've mentioned so much about China, or you want us to discuss a bit more? Come. I thought it'd be good to hear early China's perspective, because we're going to spend a lot of time discussing China today, so this afternoon. So let's get a sense of.
I asked the DPM a question because I thought after I asked the question, I no longer need to speak. It's unfortunate that my assumption is wrong. I thought that with Donald Trump elected, China is no longer in the spotlight. That's not true. What I want to say is probably in the past few years, the media has guided us to focus too much on the negative side of China's external behavior. For example, the South China Sea, the East China Sea. China has been categorized as a country which is a revisionist country, trying to expand its territory, that sort of thing. It's not true. Actually, China has not claimed additional rights or territorial interests. What has claimed in the South China Sea has never changed, even today. So in that regard, it's not a revisionist country. But its behavior is more assertive in the sense that in the old days, China did not take a proactive approach of defending its claimed legitimate rights. Nowadays, China is more proactive. Building on the rocks is nothing new in the South China Sea. It's nothing new in the world. Actually, the Vietnamese had done it. The Filipinos had done it. And then, yesterday we were at the boat in the river in Singapore. Somebody reminded me of the Changi Airport was built on the reclaimed land. So it's nothing new, but the style was, and the pace, the scale was quite impressive. But to focus on those issues is not very helpful. I think China is in the learning curve. Now it's suddenly become strong. And then in the old days, Chinese government was saying to the people that, look, we cannot do very much in the South China Sea because we are weak. And now people are saying that, no, you are not weak anymore. You have to do something. So in a way, Chinese government was responding to this kind of popular pressures built on the past logic. But the problem is, as China becomes stronger, as China acquires more interest throughout the world, probably China's view on territory, maritime interests would also change. For example, in the old days, we thought that maybe the 200 nautical miles EEZ is a good thing, Now, so China supported the negotiation of the UNCLOS on that basis. Nowadays, if you ask the Chinese to renegotiate that clause, probably China will say, maybe it's not necessarily a good choice. As a future superpower, probably China's interest in the future may lie in the fact that maybe, in the logic that maybe more high seas, the better, rather than less high sea, the better. Probably more in line with the US interest than with its previous interests. But anyway, what I want to say is, we have a problem there of adjustment. And we have problems in the South China Sea, East China Sea disputes. But these things should be carefully and pragmatically managed. And then we can address other more important issues, such as establish new type of great power relations with the US, defend the international order, even when we try to revise some of the unjust, unfair aspects of it, and try to reinvent or redevelop, improve on the international order together with other countries, including the United States. So I think cooperation, collaboration on that basis probably will be more fruitful to help us to ward off the negative changes and threats and risks that are looming large nowadays. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jinko. That was very good. So, Chris, let's assume that you mentioned that Rex Tillerson could be a good Secretary of State. I actually think that Chris Hill could make a very good Secretary of State. So, Chris, if you let's say, were designing a new policy for China, for United States, what would be the key things you would emphasize from the US side to match what Jinko said are the priorities from China's side?
First of all, I think the South China Sea is an important issue, and not just for the sort of literal issues of who has a claim there. I think its importance goes far beyond just the literal question of whether this is a change in Chinese policy, et cetera. I take the point that it isn't a change. What is a change, though, is not only the assertion of the claims and the construction of things, which I don't put in the same category of constructing an airport, in landfill situations. I think that's a little different. But I think what is worrisome is, to me, one of the problems of Asia, and I think you alluded to it, that Asia somehow punches below its weight in terms of sort of maintaining the overall state structures, overall sort of international system. The problem is the failure to develop sort of multilateral structures. And I'm not going to launch into the sort of European history or talk about things that people often talk about when they don't know a lot about it. But there is no Westphalian tradition around here. And the tradition is quite different. The tradition is of tributary states. And so I think you have to be a little careful when you assert historical rights based on a system that was totally different. And by the way, I think, as anyone knows who's been married or whatever, being right is not always the right way to go. So I think what is worrisome about the South China Sea...
Your wife is a very lucky woman.
Hey, I'm a diplomat. I think you're
getting good marital advice here also.
I think what is worrisome is, if China tries to assert South China Sea as a core interest, what does that mean for the other countries, the ASEAN countries, who have a direct interest? So it's as if this very large country is saying this is core interest, and yeah, you may have your interest, but this is our core interest. Core interest essentially is another way of saying we don't negotiate core interests. And the degree, and so there's a little sort of element there of arrogance, which is worrisome. The second element that's worrisome is we know that ASEAN has spent some 50 years trying to build a community. And they continue to work on it. It's a process every day. There'll be more things done in the future. It's the right way to go. And then for China to say, well, we'll talk to individual countries, is a little bit of a statement that we don't care about the community you're building. We're going to pick you off one at a time. And then when they bring a character, that's the closest, the most polite I can be, the president of the Philippines for a visit to try to sort of buy off Filipino issues in the South China Sea, again, shows a bit of lack of respect. And so I think China needs to understand that this South China Sea, it's not just about claims, it's about a whole attitude to how you're going to manage your neighborhood. And by the way, I speak from an American vantage point where, believe me, we haven't always done the right thing. And if you had a Latin Americanist here, they would tell you. But I'm kind of worried about how China is dealing with this. Because if Asia is to develop the structures to allow it to punch at its right weight, I think they're going to have to create multilateral structures with the sense of mutual respect, and I'm not seeing that right now. Just really quickly, I mean, Tillerson will understand these issues. I mean, I can't say I have a lot of experience with him, but I've dealt with him on some Indonesian questions. I mean, you don't have to tell him something 3 times. I mean, he gets it the first time. But as I suggested, I think the real issue will be, will the State Department manage these issues? Will a president who has really staked a great deal of interest in the question of trade relations with China want to put his imprimatur? That is the big issue for Asia, because if the president tries to push on this trade relationship, tries to put one China policy on the table, I think it's going to be very difficult to address these other problems.
Good. Well, you understand the thing?
Same, yes. I mean, first of all, I do think it's enormously important that, that the many features of the U.S.-China relationship get engaged. So, Chinese often emphasize, let's speak about win-win possibilities. Well, I think there are areas where the U.S. and China can work collaboratively and positively, and it's important in the framing of U.S. policy towards China that those be developed and acknowledged. And so I would say, I would hope that at some point soon, that more nuanced policy starts to get articulated. We don't have the Asia team in place in this administration, nor have we seen a full articulation of U.S.-Asia or U.S.-China policy. The dimension that is actually most worrisome to me about the president-elect is not on the security side, where I feel that the security team he's brought in will be more likely to be aligned with these issues than misaligned, but on the economic side, where he's come out very strongly on a selective and fairly narrow set of trade issues. So I would say that in fashioning a U.S.-China policy, the fact that we have nearly 1 million Chinese students in the United States successfully studying and happily so, the fact that we're having much more Chinese investment in the United States being welcomed by governors and cities all over the United States, the kind of very positive human-to-human and cultural dimensions. We have a multi-layered and complex relationship with China. And as I think many feel, getting this right is hugely important for the world. And so developing that more nuanced and multifaceted strategy, I think, will have to and will gradually reveal itself.
Cheol-Hee, I got a very difficult question for you.
Not easy one?
As you know, one thing that Trump said, which actually was quite striking in the campaign, was, China and Japan should pay, Japan and South Korea should pay more for their defense, right? He said that very categorically. So I would have thought that something like this, with the impending presidency of Donald Trump, would drive South Korea and Japan together closer. But just yesterday, the Japanese ambassador again left South Korea because of some statue of a comfort woman. So why do you have this fragility in the South Korea-Japan relationship? Why can't you both get together and beat up Trump?
Fragility or frigidity?
That's actually,
my English not very good.
That's $1 million question. And then I will link with Jia point, and I will twist Enrico Rita's the categorization of European countries into East Asia.
Yeah.
I think there are two categories of East Asian countries. There are weak countries that they think they are strong. And then there are strong countries that they think they are not strong. So the relationship between Korea and Japan are like that. So Korea, I think, is a relatively small country, but I think is very strong spiritually and then morally. So they always blame Japan over the history-related issue. Japan has a claim that Japan has reasons to be criticized about the issue about all the wrong behaviors in the past, including the Singapore Lee Kuan-yew. The Prime Minister Lee Kuan-yew was barely escaped. He barely escaped the kind of massive killing in Singapore. So when you consider that kind of a past memory, people cannot forget it. They have a very living memory. It's not a kind of a past memory. The kind of the comfort woman is a kind of a good living example of a very unhappy history between the two countries. So I hope the Japanese leaders are much more apologetic, truly. But the Japanese political leaders' behavior does not come up to that much expectation for reasons of domestic reasons and others, understandable. But I think Korean general public requests too much to Japan. That I always warn the Korean people that you don't understand Japan, especially changed Japan after Abe. The Japan under Abe has been changed a lot. The former diplomat Tanaka Hitoshi told me a very interesting story during a seminar that in the past, we thought Korea is like a small elementary school children when they are university students. So whenever they say, they just, okay, listen to it, don't claim against it, and then, okay, if they ask some money, give money. Not anymore. So they just think that you are also a university student. I'm grown up and then become a social person, but you are grown up, so don't criticize me too much. If you beat me, I will say it's really itch. Yeah? It's painful. So that's happening. So under that situation, Koreans are preoccupied too much about the past history issue. I think, personally, I think we should get over that symptom and then collaborate with Japan over all the security economy issues, especially against the North Korean threat. But so in the middle of advancing to that direction, again, the civil organization came up and then trying to disrupt the order. So I don't want to blame any specific organization, but still that's really happening. That's reality. We cannot get away from it. So, and Japan is not fully responding to that in a kind of embracing manner. It's kind of rejecting and then bluntly negating the Korean criticism and then a kind of a classic course sometimes. But this is up and down. I don't think it will go on. It will be stabilizing in the future, and then the cooperative mood will come up again, but again, tackled by the civic organization preoccupied with history issues. So that will come up and up, on and on. So I think that we should accept it as a kind of reality, rather than, let's get rid of it. We just erase this kind of page of history. I don't think that can be true, the reality. So we have to live with it, but we have to find a kind of more wisdom to live comfortably and then try to accumulate the habits of cooperation between us.
I'd just like to add on this issue of it's essentially an old argument. It's called burden sharing. Mm-hmm. And this issue of, are the Koreans and Japanese paying enough? First of all, I think some of these comments are made in the campaign, and I think some of these comments are not going to be brought forward to actual governance. And so this is one that I predict is not going to be an issue in the future because, frankly speaking, the Republic of Korea has a very good story to tell with respect to its capacities and its investments in defense. I think Japan has a good story to tell. And if our president wants to get in on the argument that somehow there should be more than 1% of the GDP, he's free to do so, but that's a kind of a different argument. I think where the burden sharing is going to be an issue is more on the NATO side, where you have small countries that have not achieved the goals on percent of GDP. And so I think we'll see some of that be brought forward into the Trump administration. But I don't think this issue of burden sharing in South Korea or Japan will be an issue. I'll say one other thing, which is I think the president-elect, or certainly the candidate Trump, had a view that somehow we have these alliances out there for someone else's purpose, that we have no interest in having an alliance with the Republic of Korea. We're just doing it to help the Republic of Korea. That's a complete fallacy. And he needs to be disabused of that. He needs to understand that we have alliances in Europe, we have alliances in Asia for our interests that correspond with the interests of the other countries. And the notion that we are just doing this because we want to be nice to other people is really just doesn't comport with the truth. And I hope that that will come across to him at some point.
Okay, let me quickly ask you a difficult question before I throw it out, open to the floor. You dealt more with North Korea than most American diplomats have. If I gave you a magic wand today, what could you do with your magic wand to deliver a sort of a conceivable, practical, realistic solution to the North Korean problem?
Yeah. Well, I'm still in therapy for dealing with it.
First, he gives marital advice.
My whole team, we got a Groupon on that. I don't think there's going to be a solution without a deepening relationship with China on these security issues.
So that's a key link.
I think that is a key link. And if I kind of line up all the issues that we have with China, I would put that kind of up on the top. And so I think we have to kind of set some priorities in dealing with China. I think it requires kind of a deep dive with the Chinese, because what are the Chinese worried about? I think they feel that any pressure on North Korea is going to result in North Korea's demise, which, frankly, I think would not be a bad day by, most standards. But I think China worries about a lot of things. Yes, they worry about refugees, which is what you see all the time. But frankly, I think if 22 million North Koreans left, they wouldn't go north, they'd go south. And even if they all went north to China, and the last person remembered to turn out the lights, I just don't see that as the main problem with China. I think it's a much more subtle problem. I think the real problem is, notwithstanding win-win, I think for most Chinese, win-win is, I don't know, the name of some Burmese politician or something. I don't think they understand the concept of win-win. And
his name was Ne-Win.
What they worry about is this will be perceived as a victory for the United States and a defeat for China. So a real diminution in their kind of security status. Secondly, they worry that the U.S. could bring up troops, listening posts. Otherwise, China would be perceived as having had their security diminish, and the U.S. would be gaining. So we need to take on that issue and make it clear to the Chinese, together with the ROK, because we can't be talking to the Chinese about issues relating to our alliance with the ROK without the ROK. Borrowing from my old days in Poland, the Poles would always say, nothing about us without us. That is, don't start talking to the Soviet Union without us having some say to it. So we have to manage that. But I think we can manage it in a way that we can give assurances to the Chinese together with the ROK. But the final issue, and I'll be interested in Chinese views on this because it's a little more subtle, is the concept that Within China, there is a churn. There is a discussion about the appropriateness of the political process to running this sort of go-go economy. And so, does China have the right political system? Do you really need a communist party to do that? You know, there are issues like that going on in China. People are talking about it. You see it on their equivalent of, you know, social media. So, if you have a Marxist-Leninist state like North Korea collapse, North Korea is not the same as China. I mean, the system is very different, but it does call itself Marxist-Leninist. So would that kind of have some effect on the internal, let's call it a discussion within China on the appropriateness of their current system? And I think many Chinese say, well, I don't know the answer to that, but I don't want to find out. So let's not rock the boat in North Korea. All of this argues for a much deeper dive between the US and China. Just to finish off the issue, though, on what we should do, the second thing we have to do is continue to thicken up our defense of South Korea. If there is ever a perception in South Korea that we're not going to put our best hardware in there, we're not going to kind of be willing to train all the time with South Korean troops, that would be the end of the alliance. So having THAAD, this terminal high altitude area weapon, no. Defense. Thank you. Having THAAD there is really a symbol of the fact that the Americans are willing to put their very best equipment there. I think we need to do that. And I know the Chinese don't like it, but maybe they should understand that it may be a bad idea whose time has come, because we cannot just wait for the North Koreans to do something crazy. We need to be out there. And so, and finally, I think we need to work on the Iraq-Japan relationship. I think there's been a lot of progress, notwithstanding today's news, because, you know, anytime you look at U.S. troops in South Korea, you have to consider where they're all going to come, and they'll come from places like Japan. So that kind of base arrangement needs to be continued. So this is going to be a tough issue, but and we should leave the door open for negotiation. But right now, North Korea, they're not testing Trump. They're testing nuclear materials. So this idea that they're testing the new administration, that would be nice if that's what they're doing. What they're really doing is testing equipment to become a nuclear state, and I think we need to be up to that challenge.
Let me briefly jump on North Korea issue, if you don't mind. In order
to you have a solution.
Yeah, finally.
Finally. Oh.
If you give me
I tell you, this
$1 million,
afternoon will be fantastic. If we can solve the North Korean problem.
Yes. I think we have to be very realistic. The kind of getting away from a wishful way of thinking is critically important to look at North Korean issue. First of all, some people say that North Korean nuke is just a paper tiger or a negotiating chip, but actually it's not. That's a real threat. Not only a threat to South Korea, Japan, and the United States, even including China. But some people are very much complacent in a sense that North Korea will collapse anyway. That's a failed state. So it's a matter of time for them to collapse. I don't think that they will collapse so easily. So we shouldn't wait for the time that the North Korea will collapse. Even though it will collapse, it will take much more time than we think. And then also some people say that pressure and sanctions will make them surrender. I don't think they will surrender. They will get much more united and then much more blunt and then resistant against the external pressures. Finally, the money will not solve the problem. The just exiled the North Korean minister Tae Yong-ho gave a news conference that even though you give $1 trillion to Kim Jong-un, they will not give a nuke in North Korea. So we have to get rid of all those kind of unrealistic, wistful way of thinking in dealing with North Korea. I don't think I have a good solution, but if you ask me, I think combining the sticks and carrots are still needed, not just the big sticks. But when you use big sticks, we should be concerted pressure on North Korea, including China. And when you engage, this should be principled engagement in a sense that the principle should be, the bottom line should be denuclearizing North Korea, rather than just acknowledging North Korea nuclear weapon and then try to negotiate. I don't think it's acceptable. It's just a kind of giving time to North Korea.
Yeah. Well, let me ask Chris a question if I can, because I agree with both of you that there is no scenario here that doesn't have the U.S. and China working together vis-a-vis North Korea.
I mean, that's certainly how I would see
yeah.
it. I mean, there are a lot of people like John Bolton who does not agree with us.
Yeah, but
he's not here today.
No, he's not here today. But my question is, under what conditions? Yeah, under what conditions can that actually occur? I mean, despite your years of therapy, you seem to be willing to go right back into that ring. And so I'm wondering, what are the conditions where the U.S. and China could be working in an allied fashion vis-a-vis North Korea?
Chris, can I just add one point? Because I've actually written an article on this. You can go look at my website. I actually think what you need to do is surprise North Korea by doing something that they never expected, which is to get the United States to establish diplomatic relations with North Korea and have a U.S. embassy in Pyongyang. They'll be so surprised by that, they'll completely change their worldview.
You know, during the negotiations in February 2007, the North Koreans, largely because the Chinese supported this idea, felt that if we could establish an interest section in Pyongyang and a North Korean interest section in Washington, that this, you know, that would be the sort of early embassy, and that this would show give some reality to some of the things we agreed to, which was to establish relations. We agreed to those things in the September 2005 statement. And so, you know, I took it to Condi Rice. She said, Chris, that's hard. I said, I know, but I think, you know, we're getting some good signs from the Chinese on this. They think they can deliver the North Koreans on it. She goes, all right, I'll take it to the president. She comes back. She says, okay, he's agreed to it. So, you know, it's not easy. And so I go to the North Koreans, and we were actually in Berlin, and I said, Mr. Kim, I have a proposal. I kind of laid it out, kind of looked at it, and said, no, we're not interested in that. You know, so the thing about the North Koreans is they'd be interested in something until they were not interested in something. And, you know, you just felt at times they just weren't serious, because they would say, well, we need a treaty to end the war. So, you know, we convened this whole thing. We had a Korean Director General working together with Kathy Stevens, who's the principal DAS. We come up, okay, we are prepared to put a treaty on the table. So it was very difficult to deal with this. But what we were really trying to do in these talks is to show the Chinese that we were serious, We wanted the Chinese to see that the Americans really wanted to do something. And secondly, because we kind of had a left-of-center South Korean government under Roh Moo-hyun, we wanted to show them that notwithstanding all this, you know, this bomb-throwing rhetoric coming out of Washington think tanks, that we were very serious about finding a negotiated solution. So we did all that, and North Korea walked away from it.
So what's your answer to merits about U.S. and China? What else can be done?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he said it's hard to find that pathway.
To me, if the U.S. and China can solve North Korea, we can solve anything. We would establish patterns of cooperation, which people would be astounded by it, and I think it would really lay the groundwork for a lot of cooperation, leading to a much more harmonious world.
Okay.
And great power relations. So.
Harmonious great power relations. Okay. Question.
So let's continue the discussion.
He's also a graduate of the Lee
China-U.S. relation.
Yeah, but you're from China, but you graduated from this school.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of takes away
we are happy
a little.
to learn from other countries, you know, U.S., Singapore. Yeah. So, you know, if I'm not wrong, the U.S. government repeatedly states that we welcome China's rise. But according to our DN, America is not ready for being number two. So my question to our American friends, what's American leaders and people's real feeling about being overtaken by China gradually, at least economically? What's the real feeling? And if possible, can you give some advice to our President Xi Jinping how to deal with Donald Trump, who has volatile characters and ideas. Thank you.
He doesn't need to move to Canada. So. You want to
Well,
take that one on
I'll
first?
just get started. I mean, I think, you know, there are many real feelings in the United States, so that you will get many answers to that question. You know, I think many Americans are concerned about a feeling that they don't have a level playing field when doing business in China. That's one. And that when China comes to the United States, either in SOE or private firms, you know, that it's a more non-discriminatory environment. So I think that these kinds of frictions between our systems are going to continue. But overall, I think the US system is very open to Chinese investment. And American firms are very interested in deepening their economic ties in China. So, I mean, these are important and real strands, and I think the economic ties remain a pretty fundamental feature of our relationship. So working on those is quite important. I think I would advise both Mr. Trump and President Xi that when you're engaging in public diplomacy, it is best to be diplomatic. So I think
that sounds so obvious.
It's an elusive concept with some people.
But I think it bears repeating at this moment.
Yeah.
But you know, Barry, if I don't mind, I'm just going to. He did ask the question about what's the feeling in the United States. How do you adjust to a world? Let's say someday the Chinese GNP becomes bigger than the US.
I think there'll
How
always
do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think there are always Americans who would say, "What? We're not number one anymore," and you know, you'll get that. I mean, when the Europeans made tremendous progress through the 1980s in terms of deepening, consolidating the European Union, which, you know, those of us who know Europe we were so pleasantly surprised by all the success. I mean, obviously there are problems, but they had the German unification issue to spur them forward. It was very positive stuff. And yet you still had people saying, oh my God, there's a new, you know, United States of Europe with 350 million people. They're going to be bigger than we are. What are we going to do about that? Frankly, it was in our interest. It's in our interest to see European progress there. And I don't think a locus.
China?
Yeah, I don't think a locus of opinion in the U.S. would reveal a kind of, gee, we better knock China down lest they mathematically have a greater GDP. I mean, you'll get that in a bar room. People will be watching, you know, a football game and say, oh, do you hear we've, you know, we're lower than China. You know, what have they done? You know, I really don't think that's a serious issue among most policymakers. So. I think what we want to see with China is, I was kidding before that I wouldn't mention the term responsible stakeholder, but here I go. I think we want to see China as a country.
The person who said it is unmentionable.
We want to see a China that, you know, plays by the rules, that you know, that we can work with on issues and. You know, invest in each other's countries. I really think the opinion that somehow we've got to fear China is not a majority opinion, but I won't say it's a zero opinion. I think there are a lot of people who feel that way.
Let me say one thing about it.
Do you prefer to see China number one or China number two?
Does it matter?
Time period.
I mean,
It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Actually, the total size of GDP is not the only criteria that just to kind of gauge the great powership. I always tell my Japanese friend that don't be worried. Even though the China surpasses your GDP by 10 times, still it's almost equal. Chinese population is 10 times larger than you. As long as they're not sleeping, as long as they're not running, they can develop more, and then the economically can be bigger. So that's not a concern. The concern I have is much more deeper. The concern that is, in order to China become a great power, truly, I think they have to have a freedom of the speech principle. I still think that listen to us. We are stronger than you. So I don't know whether they have the kind of patience to listen to others. Not yet. Second, so there's a kind of still some kind of a discrimination. According they judge the other party by the size of the country, size of the body, or whatever. So it's a kind of the 5 categories of countries that this is great power, superpower, great power, middle power, and then treat to them accordingly. So it's not an equal treatment. Of course, the United States treat countries equally, but still, formally they keep it. And then third is the kind of principle, the soft power, institutional norms. So they just to let other countries respect China. That's the kind of ultimate, the solution to make China great.
Great again.
Yeah, I think it's really not yet clear what kind of international system China wants to see evolve. I mean, there is still a lot about the Chinese system that is very hard to see. It's really quite opaque. And I think that lack of clarity and a lack of a clear global agenda is going to cause concerns. China is selective in the areas around which it is engaging and speaking, and it is operating a less than fully transparent system. And in that, as a rising and hugely significant global power, it's going to cause concerns. So over time, one hopes that the reforms they talk about will actually be implemented and be, that we'll have deeper understanding of their economy. It's a very new thing to have so much attention to China and have it matter so much. So I feel that there's a huge gap between how the world has changed and how people perceive the world, both within and across countries. So excuse me for stopping you from your question. But
no worries. Just one, is the presumption of the inevitable rise of Asia the right one? Because the post-2008 Atlantic crisis, the bulk of the increase in debt in the world actually has happened in Asia, and principally in China. So is the answer to the bipolar, unipolar world is not a multipolar world, but a no-polar world? Is that a possibility?
Kishore, you have staked your reputation on this, so I think you ought to answer the
you
question.
take the responsibility.
This is what happens when you come from a small country, the big power pushes you. We're used to it. No, you're absolutely factually, you're right. The level of debt has gone up in the region, but I can assure you that it's in no way an unmanageable problem. I mean, as you know, what is Japan's total debt now? 280% of GNP? Yeah. So if you go to Japan, you see it's very comfortable. People are living very well. So the debt is not the issue. The question is what policies you use to manage the debt. In the case of China, China has still got a tremendous amount of resources. And as you know, even though it's gone down from $4.2 trillion to $3 trillion, $3 trillion is still a lot of money that China has. So I don't see that as the critical issue. The more critical issue, frankly, to assess whether or not it's going to be the Asian century is look at the people. Look at the educational levels of the people. Look at the charts of people just going to, primary school, secondary school, universities. And look, and if you want, I always say, if you want a glimpse of the future, go to a graduation ceremony of any leading North American university. And I actually have. My son graduated from Carnegie Mellon. And when the list of PhDs in science and engineering are read out, it's quite an astonishing sight, and I saw it with my own eyes. Their names, you've given me Tan, Lee, Wang, Kumar, Kapoor, Rakesh. Yeah. Then Tom Friedman wrote a column once. He said, luckily one David Morrow saved the day. One Anglo-Saxon walked up on the stage. He looked kind of out of place. The PhDs. So, I mean, I'm just telling you, this is, by the way, data. And that's actually I co-participated in the production of a book by IIE called Will Asia Be the Next Higher Education Superpower? And the provost of NUS and I wrote the introduction to that. So there is a lot of data that's behind this. So that's unstoppable. But of course, you will never ever be a straight rise to the top. I mean, that's rubbish. It'll go up, it'll go down. It'll be a rocky ride. And there will be lots of challenges. And my big fear about the Asians is that Asians are psychologically not ready, for a different world that is coming. Especially, as I said in my introductory remarks, they're not ready to take on more responsibilities. And that worries me. Yes, please. Now, please introduce yourself.
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Muhammad. I'm a student in the MPP program in the LKY. I'm from Palestine. My question is, today I've heard the concepts of great power, great countries, and so on several times. What makes a country great in the first place? How do we know if this country is a great country or superpower? What makes it superpower? Yeah. The second question is Mr. Kishore, because you talk about the rise of China a lot, and that China will become probably at some point the next greatest power in the world. But the point you emphasize the most is its economy. Now, the Chinese per capita is very low if we compare it to other countries. So it is true now it's the biggest or the largest economy in the world, but also it has the largest population, which adds more burden on it. So probably, technically, it's not really the largest economy. Like Singapore, probably the average salary or per capita is 62,000. In China, it's less than 7,000. The gap is huge. So that's not the features of probably the greatest country in the world. But the question is, Japan was the second largest economy in the world, but its role in the international politics was very, very low. Especially in the Middle East, we barely notice it. So why China would be different with a huge economy? Why would it succeed where Japan didn't? Japan did not translate its economic power into political power. Why would China do? Thank you.
Why did the Lee Kuan Yew School teach you to ask difficult questions?
If you ask the UN that question, they would point to the permanent members of the UN Security Council as developed in the 1940s. But in fact, as you suggested earlier, I mean, how can you talk about great powers without talking about India, for example? And then there's certain countries that just have a lot of influence in the world, even though they're maybe not militarily huge.
Like Singapore.
Like Singapore. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
So
almost a great power.
Yeah, and well, you see this in Europe. I mean, sometimes the smaller countries in Europe, they know they're small, so they have to be quick, and they have greater influence. So I think it's a concept that isn't permanent in any way, but. When I think about, will China take over for the U.S., I don't see China yet sort of looking at an Ebola crisis in Africa and saying, we got to do something about that, unless they can tie it directly to, I don't know, some production facility on the vaccine. So I don't think China's ready to do that. But when they are, I think they'll be welcomed in kind of taking on that kind of burden. China has done some things in terms of, police force in Haiti, things like that. And so I think to some extent, some of these countries just limit themselves and don't want to be considered a great power. They don't have that kind of investment in it. And I think Japan is one of those countries.
Yeah, let me answer the question. Then I was going to turn to later Cheol-Hee, Merit, if you want to add something after that. And then I'll do the wrap up after that. Let me answer your question. And you're absolutely right that it's not just about the size of the GNP. And that's not my definition of what a great power is. But you have to have what you call comprehensive power. So you got to have military power, political power, cultural power, and so on and so forth. And by that definition, clearly, in comprehensive terms, United States is still the number one. But my point of departure from most American analysis of China, and frankly, I find most American analysis of China tends to be unfair. That they expect China to somehow do more, in a sense, be more virtuous than other great powers have been. And Chris himself said, that if you had a Latin Americanist in the room, he'll tell you the number of times that the United States has intervened. So great powers all do good things and they do bad things. That's perfectly normal. But the reason why I'm actually optimistic about China, and actually I gave a lecture at Harvard last year called What Happens When China Becomes Number One. It's only been viewed 150,000 times, not like the St. Gallen 400,000 times. But the message there is that you must stop seeing the CCP as the Chinese Communist Party. Because the Chinese, frankly, the role of CCP is not to spread communism around the world. The role of CCP, and the name of CCP means the Chinese Civilization Party. Because the real goal of the Chinese party is to actually strengthen Chinese civilization. And if there's a return of a great Chinese civilization, and I would use, let's say, the Tang Dynasty period as an example of what happens when China becomes great, then I see you will see a very different China emerging. But right now, China is going through, it is a fact, a very insecure phase. And great powers with a sense of insecurity can behave very strangely, and that's why China, as you notice, has become more assertive recently. But let's look down the road, and if you look down the road, I am actually more confident that China will emerge as, you know, I'm going to use the same word, responsible stakeholder. So, Merit, you want to say something?
Well, I think you've said that beautifully. You know, I do think that we're talking about our hope that China will be not only successful on its own terms, but will be a positive influence in the world. And on all the issues that it can positively influence, and there are many. And so I think that's what we're talking about here, whether it's climate or it's health or it's, you know, terrorism or it's regional stability, et cetera. I mean, those are just a few of the dimensions that we hope and need for China to grow into as it becomes economically more influential in the world.
The easiest way of answering that question would be, oh, look at John and I. Combine the hard power and soft power combined. Easiest answer. But if I break it down, I think the great power should have the capacity to excel others and embrace others. So, okay, pay your own proportion. I don't know. That's a great power. And willingness to lead and then make a key decision about the global affairs. So, oh, I don't care, and then I'll just step back from the thing. I think. I don't think it can become a global great power. And finally, attractiveness to mobilize respect from others. So you cannot enforce respect from others. Yeah. Kishore is very respectful, but you didn't enforce anybody to respect you. So, so the kind of attractiveness is a kind of another dimension of great power.
Okay, as you can see, the time is up. I'm just going to, please remain seated. I'm just going to go up and say a few closing remarks. I know that many of you are exhausted. So I will not try to summarize what we have done today. But what I thought I could, you know, there's been so much wisdom that's been shared here with all of you today. But what I'll share with you is my own three takeaways from the 3 sessions that we've had today. And I must emphasize that there was a lot, but I'm just going to give you my own personal takeaway of what I remember most vividly about each session. The first session, of course, with the DPM Taman, I'm going to take away the German word he used, which I'm told is pronounced Ge-Erdete. So, Ge-Erdet. So it's about being down to earth, basically. The root word is earth. And I think that for me was a very important takeaway, because in all the discussions about Trump and Brexit, about the anger about the middle class, the anger of the working class, and how they felt that the world has left them behind, I think there's been insufficient focus on the responsibility of the elites, who have really benefited in a spectacular way from globalization in the last 10 to 20 years, global inequality, national inequality has become such a big problem. So if the global elites, and by the way, we now have a staggering situation where Bill Gates is worth $60 billion or $65 billion, Warren Buffett is worth how much, and so on and so forth. So with that amount of wealth, if we can actually persuade these global elites to actually do more for society, I think that in itself could change a lot and will create a much more unified society, both nationally and globally. So I saw that word as a sign of hope. For the second session, the one takeaway was the important message that Enrico gave us when he said, don't look back. Remember, he said that Trump and Brexit have no positive message. They're basically saying to us, let's go back to a great past, right? Let's make America great again. And I think that's the wrong approach to take, and I completely agree with you, Enrico. And I must say that I'll also remember another remark that Enrico made, that this moment of crisis, and by the way, I absolutely guarantee you the next 6 to 12 months are going to be rocky. I have no doubts whatsoever. But if in this crisis, as you say, if Europe becomes adult again, that actually will be a dramatic shift in the geopolitical landscape, So that, I thought, was a very big takeaway from the second session. And finally, from this session, which we just finished, for me, the personal takeaway is what Chris said. China cannot fit into 140 characters. I think that's a very important statement because, we have actually so far, and I mean this, experienced a geopolitical miracle where China has basically gone from the 10th, 15th largest economy to becoming the second largest economy in nominal terms without disrupting the global order. And that's very unusual. It's actually abnormal. Traditionally, when a great power emerges, the global order should be shaken. And it hasn't been shaken, and it's been remarkably stable, and we all still go comfortably to the future. But unfortunately, if Donald Trump carries on with his approach, then we will actually get the geopolitical shakeout that could have happened. So for us, if we can persuade Donald Trump that China cannot fit into 140 characters, Chris, if you can send him that message, it would mean that you handle a much more complex geopolitical situation with equally complex policies. And I think if you do that, we can create a better world. And at the end of the day, as you know, the name of the conference is Has the Game Changed? I suppose the simple answer is yes, the game is changed, but the game is not over. There's still hope. Thank you very much. And please thank this panel here for the spectacular job they did.